All right, so I think we're good to go here. So I'd like to welcome now on video our guest for tonight, who's Junior Salazar, who's running for Florida State House District 70. Welcome, Junior. We're Progressive Manatee. We got started in 2020 to focus our energy on races and candidates who are progressive in Manatee County. And so District 70 still has a little bit of Manatee County in it, so you fall under our view here, and you're an old-time Manatee County activist, so we're really happy to have you on. I'd like to start off by asking you to share a little bit about your background in Manatee County and how you got active in local politics.
Sure. So thank you for having me first and foremost, and thank you for all the work that you guys do. As an activist all of my life, I know that the work that we do is not easy. It's not something that, no one takes for granted. At least no one should, because it is a lot of work. So growing up, I was born and raised in Bradenton, so I'm a Floridian, I'm a native. And I found a passion for just helping people at a very early age after I lost my father. I unfortunately lost him. He committed suicide when I was 9. And after that, I needed an outlet, and my outlet was helping other people. And that was kind of where my beginning of helping others kind of stemmed from. And from there on out, I started getting involved in volunteerism work in the community at a very early age. Even in high school, I was, donating, like, I think in my junior year, I donated like 1,000 hours of volunteer service, just because that's what I like to do. It was my outlet of grief, but it was also something good that was helping other people, whether it was helping with elderly senior projects or pet projects. I worked with an organization that used to be around, and I believe they still are, but they're under a different name now. They used to be Manatees. And so those of you who are from Manatee County might remember them. But Manatees was a teen group that was made of about 11,000 teen volunteers. And we would do all types of service projects. Now I believe they're called Volunteer Services of Manatee County, but they used to be called Manatees. And so we would do beach cleanups. We would do senior days where we would go spend time with seniors, whether it be at their homes or in nursing homes. We would do pet walks, we would do fundraising, we would do can drive goods for the local community. There'd be tons of stuff. And so as I got older and graduated high school, eventually they were like, okay, well, you're not a teenager anymore, so you can't really be a part of us. So you kind of have to go out and spread your wings. So I started my banking career in 2007, which I've been in the finance industry now over 15 years. And I started looking for ways to continue doing that good work. And I got involved with a lot of networking organizations. I became the president of the Latin Chamber of Commerce, which is down there in Manatee, Sarasota. I was a 2-time president for them and served on their board for 10 years. And then I got really, really into how I could better serve my community, not just on the business spectrum of how it was benefiting me in the finance world. So I used that expertise and I got involved. I served on the budget committee for the school district of Manatee County, which was a citizen-ran committee where we oversaw the budget. We made recommendations. We kind of, and when I say oversaw, we made those recommendations lightly because it wasn't up to us. It was ultimately up to the board. But we were a citizen committee that got to oversee it and give our take on it. I also got to serve on the Financial Services Oversight Committee for the county commissioners, the Board of County Commissioners for Manatee County. So that was an additional opportunity where I was able not only to leverage my expertise in finance, but also help other people in our community really get transparency from our local government. And as you can hear, that's kind of where everything began to tie in together. As I saw, okay, well, this is all really good work that needs to be done, but we don't have that many voices. So I really started getting passionate about politics in about 2015 when Hillary was getting ready to run. And I eventually became the youngest LGBTQ candidate that qualified for the mayoral race in the city of Bradenton. It was a 3-way race in 2016, and we took a little bit over 20% of the vote. And so that was really good because I was running against an incumbent who had been in office for over 15 years. And I was running against another gentleman. Both were Republican. I was the only Democrat. But to see, when most people said, oh, this is a young kid, I was 29 at the time. This is a young kid. It's his first race. He doesn't know what he's doing. He doesn't, know. But what was different was that people wanted change. People were tired of the same old politics as usual. And so that's why when people thought that we were getting, oh, he's going to be lucky to get 5% of the vote, and we ended up taking over 20% of the vote, although it wasn't a win, it sent a shock through politics to say, okay, there's obviously something that people want. We just need to stay engaged and active in our communities. And so I eventually became the vice chair for the Democratic Party of Manatee County. I served with Cheryl when she was chair. And then I just really helped with numerous campaigns afterwards. So eventually I ended up helping Michelle Raynor when she first got elected to her office. I ended up helping Michelle Raynor with her first run. And then I ran a city commission race. It was the first time I was asked, if I'd consider being a campaign manager.
Right.
And I said, I never thought about it, but I'd be more than happy to. I always thought myself as the candidate, but I know some stuff. And I ran Sheldon Jones' campaign in the city of Palmetto. And as many of you know, he ended up winning. And so he became the city commissioner for Palmetto in the most recent election. And he beat out his opponent with a team. I put a team together. We were able to knock on the doors, get the job done, and get him elected. And he was just, an average guy. He a veteran. He's a union postal worker. He still works for the mail service. He's your local mail guy in Palmetto. And he said, I just want to do something bigger on a bigger spectrum and be a voice for people. And, I believed in him and he believed in me. And so we just really made a good partnership together, helped him get elected to office. And then I just continued as I moved to Hillsborough. I moved to Hillsborough about a little bit over a year ago now. And since I moved here, I've been looking for ways to how I get my feet wet. Because if you guys probably know Hillsborough, it's a lot bigger than Manatee County. Now, Manatee County is huge, but Hillsborough County is even bigger. And so there's a lot of territory to cover. And I'm in South County. And in South County, it's very rural. It's very conservative. But there's a lot of diversity in South County. And so it's when we identified, a few different races that we were looking at, there was a lot of, redistricting talk going on. And so we weren't sure where we were headed. But then we landed in this particular race that made up the new 70, which now encompasses Southern Hillsborough and Northern Manatee. And it just made the most sense because I live in the old 70, but I also live in now the new 70, which is, the district that I'm running for now. So that's a little bit about my background. I have a daughter who is 11 years old. I graduated with my bachelor's back in 2017. I finished my bachelor's in business and my minors in marketing. So goes to say business, finance, all of that stuff, that is my background. And so, but my biggest thing is just helping people and giving people a voice where they need it most, which I believe is local politics. So that's why I've chosen to run.
Right. That's great, and thank you for answering at length because you covered what I was going to talk about next, which was the Merrill campaign in Bradenton and then the Jones campaign. So let's get up to the present day a little bit more. And I want you to talk just a little bit more about your decision to run for 70. And if I remember correctly, weren't you going for soil and water conservation district before the new law came down that restricted that just to agricultural industry people?
That is correct. And so
Right.
that was because I was new to Hillsborough. I said, well, I don't want to take on a big seat right away. I want to
Yeah.
give voters, constituents an opportunity to really meet me and get to know me, build that, platform and, allow that exposure to happen. It wasn't the same as Manatee. So I said, well, let me, start small and work my way up.
Yeah.
And so that was the initial decision. And, it would have gone all the way had it not been for that pesky law that was signed, that very last week of legislature back in March.
Yeah.
That limited who could run for that seat. And so now you either have to live on a agriculturally classified piece of land, or you have to have an agriculture classified business, which I have neither of the two. So it put me out, and I said, well, that wouldn't make sense. And there was a thought of a school board race, but there was somebody else who was already interested. And as a Democrat, I always respect, where we're looking at who has the stronger position, and it's something that we always look at. So it ended up, looking at, once the redistricting was done, we said 70 makes the most sense. And 70 makes the most sense because it is so diverse, because it encompasses everything south of Big Bend. So your Apollo Beach, your Ruskin, which is where I live, your Sun City, Waimama, North Palmetto, and North Parish. That's a very diverse district, probably one of the most diverse districts in the state, because it has your wealthy people in Apollo Beach. It has your Black and brown families. It has your low income families. It has your conservatives, but it also has your liberals. And so when you look at the numbers of this new district, it's so crazy diverse, because the Republicans outnumber Democrats by they have about 48,000 Republicans, if I'm thinking correctly off the top of my head, to about 40,000 Democrats. However, that doesn't include all the independents, and there's roughly almost I believe either 35 or 40,000 independents in this district. So there's a huge chunk of independents that could technically go either way. And so it just made the most sense to run, because no one like me, should I say, had run in this newly formed district. But being that my good friend, Michelle Raynor, was, the representative for the Old 70, which happens to be where I live. I lived in her district. It just made the most sense for me to take this on and say, hey, this is a good run. It's an opportunity. And I think that the Republicans aren't sure whether or not they can pull it off, because they didn't drop their opponent, or my opponent, because I didn't have a primary. They didn't drop an opponent until the very last week of qualifying. Actually, one of the very last days of qualifying week. So I think it goes to show you that there's a lot of potential. It's just something that we weren't focused on the Democratic side.
Yeah, and contesting the races as Democrats in Florida is like the most important thing. Just like, don't leave it empty. Go for it. You really need that happening. I'd like for you to talk a little bit about how your experience working in the financial sector is inform your views of, issues facing working Floridians, because you're dealing with people with the issues that they're having, meeting the bills a lot of the time. How's that kind of shaped, what you think of in terms of policy?
Yeah, well, you guys know, and for those that don't know, Florida's the fourth largest economy in the United States.
Yeah.
I mean, we have an economy worth over $1 trillion. That's huge. And it's not something that should be just left up to a sole group to be in control and say, hey, we're going to dictate the way these funds go. So the biggest thing that we're looking at right now is the fact that folks in our community who are feeling the wealth aren't ordinary people. They're Republicans, and they're under this Republican governance. And so we have to ask ourselves why. And it's because they're putting money in the pockets of organizations and for-profit companies that allow them to continue to hold that power. That's why I don't know if some of you have read the story recently. They came out, and I forget what publication it was in, but they were talking about how Florida is no longer being considered a retiree state because although we're still getting retirees, what we're seeing more of is we're seeing a lot of wealthy people move here. And a lot of those times, those wealthy people tend to be more towards the conservative side. And so one of the biggest things is balancing this budget that the state has, looking at where our funds are going, but also making sure that we have laws in place that protect our everyday constituents. One of the biggest things that I hear in District 70 and across Florida, really, but in District 70, the most polled, when I ask people what's most important to them, they not only talk about infrastructure, but they talk about being able to afford a place to live.
Yeah.
They don't have a place that they can afford to live. I have people who have told me that they have to decide between paying their car note or paying their rent.
Yeah.
That's not okay. And we don't have laws in place that are protecting our renters, that are protecting our homeowners, who are seeing now homeowners insurance policies skyrocket. I talked to a woman recently who said, you know, when I bought my house, it's a simple 3-bedroom, 2-bath house, I was paying maybe $1,000, if that, you know, in homeowners insurance policy. And now I'm paying over $3,000 in a homeowner's insurance policy. That's a huge jump for people. Now you stack that on with the inflation that we're seeing, with the fact that we're not keeping up with the wages that we should be keeping up with. Yes, the fight for 15 is still ongoing, and a lot of companies have met the mark, especially your bigger companies, but we have way more room to go. You know, I work for one of the largest firms financial firms in the country. And one of the things that we did recently as a firm is that we put all of our employees at a minimum of $20 an hour. And that, to me, tells me that people are seeing the fact that people can't afford to live. And it doesn't matter where you live, but when it relates to Florida, anywhere you live in Florida, it is almost impossible to live off of one wage, especially if that wage is minimum. And by minimum, I mean, we're talking about $10, $11, $12 an hour, which is still your median income. You know, there's people out there that are lucky to get that $15, $16 an hour, which is still putting people on a struggle if they're the only income in the household. And imagine you have kids, imagine you have a spouse who's not working or that's on fixed income. And those are issues that we aren't addressing, that while we're attacking the LGBTQ community, that while we're attacking women's rights, we're leaving the actual things that affect everyday Floridians on the table, which are these very things. It's the money is what's hurting us. It's the fact that we aren't able to live. And we're not even asking to live beyond our means. We're asking to just live. And we can't even live within our means because we don't have the wages. We don't have an economy that's working for all. It's working for the top, you know, percentage of Floridians that are your rich billionaires here, and that continue to move here. And so that's one of the things that, you know, we continue to discuss. And the other big thing is we look at how we're investing in our school system. You know, our schools are only 22nd in the nation, and that's crazy. You know, when you think about it, we're such a large state with such a large budget, yet we don't invest enough in our students. We, in fact, one of the biggest proponents that I'm a big proponent of is expanding PreK, and making sure that every child has an opportunity at PreK, and that it is considered, rather than it being a 3 or 4 day curriculum, that it be a full day curriculum to these kids. Right. Because 3 or 4 hours a day is not enough. Not only does it put a burden on the parents, because now you're saying, well, you have to figure out what happens to your child after that 3 or 4 hours, because we're done with the program afterwards. But it also doesn't create enough learning stability for that child as they get prepared to enter the public education school system or whatever system that they're entering. We're investing more in our charter schools and our private schools, which is where a lot of the children of our elitist politicians go, where a lot of the laws that they're affecting us with in our public education system, they don't affect them as equally, but they do get to take the dollars and invest into their schools. Those are things that shouldn't be allowed, that we should be really honing in on. But instead, we're focused on, again, attacking the LGBT community, attacking women's rights, attacking things that just take us back many, many years. And so there's that. We spend about $13 a day on PreK learning. And however, we spend over $34 a day in making sure that those who end up in a troubled situation remain incarcerated.
Yeah.
So we spend more money to keep our children behind bars than what we do to keep them out before they even get to a point where they can end up down that path. And that's I mean, that it makes sense that it doesn't make sense that that's a thing, but it makes sense that, this is what they want, because it then correlates to the student to prison pipeline. We talk about it all the time, but we're like, well, where does it go on? Well, it starts from very early on in age. And it's the fact that we're not investing in our education system. We're not investing in our teachers. We have a shortage of teachers right now. The other big thing, and I know that you asked mainly about budget, but this kind of, for me, encompasses everything that I really care about when it comes to the budget. Another big thing for me is what we're investing within our healthcare. We're not doing enough. We're not doing enough to ensure, not only are we revoking women's rights, but we're also not investing enough money to ensure that people have affordable prescriptions, that people have equal access to healthcare, that we have enough monies being invested into mental health specifically. When you look at Florida and how we rank, we invest a little over $40 per Floridian into mental health. However, if you look at states like Vermont spends over $400 per person in their state when it comes to investing in their mental health. That plays a huge impact in our communities of color, that it plays a huge impact in our low-income families, and in being able to save our children before they are going down a rougher road. I know what it's like not to have the resources, not to have the tools, and you going through such a situation like that, because I've been through it myself. And so knowing that we're not even investing $50 per Floridian, which $50 is still nothing, but we're not even at $50. We're under $50 per Floridian for mental health. That's a crisis that we've already been experiencing, and we're going to continue to experience, because we're not doing enough within our state legislature to ensure that monies come where people need it most, which is out in these streets, making sure that they get the help that they need, not only amongst mental health, but we have an opioid crisis that has happened over the last several years that we have failed to address. And that continues to be a big issue. And so we need to get a grip of our state legislature and the budget that they have placed before them, because we have money that is coming into Florida, but it's only being swayed one way, and it's unfortunately not impacting most Floridians. It's only impacting those that control the legislature at this point.
Yeah, and wow, you just really laid it all out so well there. Just like basically the state of where we are in Florida politics right now, which is we're bringing in all kinds of new money. It's only staying up at the top, and material conditions for Floridians are just getting worse, whether it's housing, healthcare, education, jobs. It's like everything is getting worse for Floridians, while our governor is pulling in more and more of his wealthy northern expats who are, fleeing whatever tyranny they perceive up there. And he's sort of establishing this national base based on doing a culture war through the legislature. And the last session of the Florida legislature was really just appalling in so many ways, but particularly the Don't Say Gay bill that came out, and the what I was calling the Don't Call Me White bill, which was the CRT bill that came out. I want you to talk a little bit, as someone who has a school age kid, about the impacts that kind of culture war against specifically our teachers is having, and what you might want to do to turn this tide if you were in Tallahassee.
Well, I think first and foremost, it's something that we need to repeal. I think it's nonsense. But the bigger issue lies is that, as a student who not too long ago graduated from the Manatee County School District, we already didn't get enough of history.
Yeah.
When I was a child, when I was a high school student, we didn't get the real deal stuff that I learned once I became an adult, because once you become an adult, it's all hands on deck. We get to learn all the good stuff and the reality of it. And so now, not only are we, going to limit it even further, but we're saying, well, we can't teach what it means to potentially to have experience. I think I saw recently that they had pulled Anne Frank, a novel or a book of Anne Frank off the bookshelves because they didn't want people to hear her story. So now we're silencing the atrocities that the Nazis caused. And it only goes to further question, well, then is this the party that aligns itself with the Nazis, as we've been stating for the last several years? Because this only goes to further prove that, is the fact that you're saying, well, we don't want people to know what actually occurred during the Holocaust. We don't actually want people to know that there were people of color who were taken into slavery and the effects that they had to go through. But that's real history. Without knowing our real history, we have a saying, and it probably goes regardless of culture, but I remember growing up in my household, my mom was constant in reminding me and saying, never forget where you came from, because if you forget where you came from, you'll never know where you're going. Yeah. And it's true. And I think that we're headed down a very dangerous path in Florida by not acknowledging the history that we have built, not only in Florida, but across this country, because we're saying those things didn't really happen. So let's not teach our kids that anymore. So that way future generations have no idea about it. They think this has been just a white democracy our entire life, and they've been in control. It's not something that's realistic, but it's something that kids are going to say, well, that's all we know, because that's what we're being taught now. The other side to that, aside from, the critical race theory, you have the legislature, which was the Don't Say Gay bill. As they can call it whatever fancy name they want to call it. Yeah. It was the Don't Say Gay bill. As someone who is an openly queer man, in a homosexual relationship, it's tough. It's tough to have a conversation, with an 11-year-old child to say, hey, I know that I've always taught you to be loving and accepting of everyone, but I need you to be mindful of what you say at school, because I don't want you to get in trouble, because I don't want you to be potentially expelled because of the things that you bring up in school, even though they're okay, even though we're not doing anything wrong. There's nothing that's going on that is wrong, but there are people that are ugly that don't want to see love and happiness come true. And so that's a difficult conversation. It's a conversation that I had to have as this legislation, that piece of legislation moved through Tallahassee, and school was coming around. My daughter just entered middle school, and so that's a bigger world for her to step into and have tons of people to be exposed to, but not be able to have that comfort to talk about one side of her family. She can only talk about the other side that is a heterosexual, that is in a husband and wife relationship, because that's what society per se expects now. The other part to that is we're now taking the opportunity for children to have an open conversation about their sexuality, about how they're feeling, about the questions that they have, about their own identity. We're taking that away, that safe space away. A lot of times when the safe space, and it's not because the safe space is not provided at home, but sometimes it's easier to have a conversation with a stranger, like someone who is a teacher or an educator who they don't have to come home to and live with. So sometimes that safe space is school to have that conversation. And now we're restricting their ability to have that conversation. So these kids are having no outlet. Well, what happens to those kids when they don't have an outlet? Well, same thing that happens to anyone else that's suffering from a mental illness, which is we go down very dark paths. They don't have an outlet to express themselves, to talk about how they're feeling. And so they're going to be put into a very tough situation because now they're not going to be comfortable talking about it at home because they may not be ready to talk about it at home, but they can't talk about it at school either because now it's prohibited.
Yeah.
And teachers can be fired. Teachers can be, revoked of their educator's license, and children can be expelled, and so many things could go wrong. And so now it's a line that you have to tippy toe around just to be careful. So now you just have to keep that in and suffer in silence, which is only, again, going to increase the mental health issues that we're seeing across our country in the state of Florida. And possibly, and it's without a doubt that it'll increase the suicide rate because we won't have an outlet for these kids to have a way to self-express themselves and, ask the questions that they may have, questions about their identity, their sexuality, whatever it may be. They won't have an outlet for that. And that's what's going to, unfortunately, lead us down a very dark path.
Yeah. And it's just such a disgusting position that we're putting these kids in, and it's difficult for the teachers as well. I have a good friend who's a public school teacher in Sarasota County, and he was talking about how on the first day that they came in before school started, they were told that they would have to file 9 pages of paperwork if a kid so much as approached them and asked to be called by different pronouns, that they had to report the kid to the entire district, and if they didn't file this immediately after this request, that they'd be fired, right? So we already are facing a teacher shortage, and now we're putting teachers in the crosshairs of this culture war as well, which is not going to help the situation. I have one more specific question I want to ask you before I open things up.
Sure.
The new District 70, where it's sitting is really kind of right around, it's including the Piney Point site and the areas that have been most impacted by Piney Point. And I'm wondering if in your conversations with constituents, if that's been something they've been bringing up a lot, if they have a lot of concerns about that, or kind of what the read is in your district on the Piney Point situation.
So those of you who have ever followed me or have seen any of my work know that when Piney Point, the whole issue kind of became very abrupt. What was it, maybe a couple years ago?
Yeah, April of last year, I think.
Yeah, God, it seems like it's been forever. But yeah, so that first initiated, I was the one, we got a group of people and activists, and we went out there to protest out by Piney Point. We did a lot of good interviews to bring light to the issue itself. As I've been talking to people, they're not highly concerned with Piney Point itself. Mm-hmm. However, what I've been doing is I've been connecting the two together, because what they are concerned with is having clean air, clean water, and it ties the two together. But we can't have that if we have situations like Piney Point. If we can't have that, if we have people, companies like Mosaic who go under regulated. We can't have that if we have the EPA dismantled and no one holding our government accountable for our water resources and our air quality. So those are things, because that issue should have been addressed probably, if not more, a decade ago, if not longer than that, because it's been an ongoing issue that the county government was aware of. Now, a lot of the county officials said, oh, well, that was before I was elected. That was before I was elected. That was before I was elected. Yeah, but you still knew about it when you got elected. Mm-hmm. And so the buck stopped somewhere. And the fact that we waited until something actually occurred and put people at risk. I mean, I remember perfectly, because my partner at the time, he works for FedEx, which has their industrial warehouse right off of Piney Point. Mm-hmm. And my uncle at the time, who he's no longer with us, but he was serving in Manatee County jail for pullover or something that had happened. And so they weren't, one of the biggest things that we were bringing awareness to is that they weren't evacuating these detainees. Yeah. They were keeping them there not knowing the level of severity that these toxins were going to cause and the potential effects that it could bring upon them. And so as I'm talking to people, one of the bigger things that they have mentioned was the overall environment. And especially, even though it's not the Palmetto portion of the new District 70 is mainly industrial, you have people who have luxuries like golf courses, who have land on their houses, and they want to keep that property value. Well, we have to remind them that they can't keep property value and land value as good if we don't have quality of air, if we don't have quality of water. Who's going to want to buy those properties? Who's going to want to invest in those areas? Who's going to want to make sure that these areas are kept up if we can't even have good sustainability within our water and air treatments within local government? And so that has been the biggest thing, is although it hasn't been something that a lot of people have brought up, people have brought up the fact that they're concerned with their property values, that they're concerned with making sure that they have green landscape, that they have greeneries, that they're able to enjoy their parks and their beaches. And so tying the environment and how it affects and how it ties to Piney Point has been really that, oh, well, now that you say it that way, it makes sense. We should all care about what happened, because at the end of the day, it's going to affect us all. And as we're seeing now, which I think it goes to show, many people have said the same thing about the climate crisis. Oh, well, it'll affect only some people, but it's not going to affect just some people. It's going to affect everyone if we don't address it, which if we don't address it anytime soon, I mean, at this point, we're going to be lost for any solutions, because it's going to be very late for what we're doing. And that's another big thing, is making sure that we're investing a huge part of our budget in Florida into this climate crisis that we're getting ready to see. As we see what we see is the rising sea levels down in Miami and in the Keys. We're going to continue seeing those things. And people think it's funny when you say, oh, well, Florida will be underwater one day. It will be if we don't start addressing, and we're headed that path just by seeing the levels of rising seas down south. And unfortunately, people still think of it as a joke. And it's another thing where part of our money needs to be focused on is investing and making sure that we have a viable future, not only for us that are currently here, but for our future generations.
Yeah. So I want to go ahead and open it up right now. Charlene Chain, if you guys have a question you want to throw out there.
You go first, Shane. I always take a lot of time.
I don't really have any questions. I'm all in for you, Junior. What would you say would be the best way to leverage your supporters, especially in northern Manatee?
People said, well, I'll say this. It was actually, I attended the Parish Civic Association event. That was a meet and greet. Though there wasn't a huge attendance, it was enough to really get a feel for what the northern voters of Manatee really cared about. Although they are pro-life people, they don't really care. These conservative voters don't care about abortion rights. And when I say that, they don't care that we enforce it. They don't care that people have the right. They don't care that they don't have the right. They just don't care about it in general. What they do care about is what hurts their pocket. Right. So leveraging what we've been able to leverage is talking about renters' property, how much it's costing to rent, how much it's costing to pay for their homeowners insurance policies, how much it's costing to buy a home nowadays. Those are the things that get the conservative base in northern Manatee, because that's a big chunk of the conservative base is in Manatee County, in northern Manatee County, should I say, is getting them talking about where their money is actually going, where it's being spent, and how it's affecting them. When you get them talking about that and showing them that we have a plan to address those things, that is what they want the most. That is what they like to hear. They do not care if you are gay. They don't care if you are brown. They don't care if you are Catholic. They don't care about anything other than what is it doing to me? What is this? How is this affecting me? And as selfish as it sounds, that's just simply what that voter cares about. And we have to be able to leverage that to an extent to say, okay, knowing that I know this, now I have to talk to what you're needing. And so that's where you play it back to of, okay, let's talk about what's most important to you, where you think our budget money should be going to, and are we already investing our money where you think it should be? 9 times out of 10, if not more, you're seeing people say, well, I haven't seen any money come my way, helping us wise and locally in our community. I really don't know where it goes, because they don't understand how the budget works, where we could be investing, where we could be helping our local constituents. And all of those things are questions that they have. And when you can cater to those questions, it gives you an advantage.
So, thank you so much for that answer. I have a related question about insurance.
Mhm.
I've been writing a few things down, and like the insurance crisis. How well versed are you in the technical detail of what has been passed? And do you have any new ideas that you might want to put into legislation to offer that at least shows that you are spun up on the issue and are actively pushing for something that will bring relief to homeowners in HD 70?
We really haven't done much when it comes to legislation towards, and in fact, I believe there's a special session that the governor has called for to even address this, because it wasn't something that was a priority for the last legislative session. And so without it being a priority, we're not seeing it affected by any sort of legislation. What is happening though, is although I can't say that I'm an expert, what I can say is what is happening is that we are allowing these insurance policy rates to skyrocket as a state. And what I mean by that is by government state. We're allowing that to happen because when insurance companies are investing, they invest into politicians who are going to make decisions on their behalf in their best interest, not in the people's interest, but in their best interest. So when they get those insurance hikes, they say, oh yeah, they tell the consumer, the constituent, we're going to fight for you. We're going to do what's right. We're going to make sure they don't get their way. Then they turn around and the insurance says, well, we want to increase rates 30%. Oh yeah, that's no problem. But we can't say that out loud because we told the constituent that we have their back. And what happens is that a portion of those monies goes right into the politicians' pockets. And that's what we're seeing a lot of dark money go to. A lot of the dark money from these bigger corporations is being funneled into politicians who will allow these companies to have their way in Florida. And so one of the biggest things for me is making sure that, one, we don't have an opportunity as politicians, whether we're candidates or already elected officials, to take money from corporations where we're going to have a piece of legislation come before us where we're going to be able to make a decision. And if we had to have a piece of legislation and we've accepted money, that we would be forced to abstain from voting one way or the other so that we aren't swayed by that money. And that's something that we currently aren't doing because we're ran by a Republican legislature. So it's, a free-for-all right now. All the money coming in from these major corporations is going right into their pocket. They don't have to disclose it. And they tell the consumer one thing, but then they tell the insurance, yeah, go ahead, just swipe it under the rug. We'll put it in this piece of legislation. They won't even notice it. And this is where we end up. So making sure that we don't have politicians that are catering to the best interest of the corporations, but also making sure that transparency takes place with what these companies are asking for not just a blanket statement of, hey, we're doing this in our communities. Meanwhile, we're going to increase our rates on the back end in order to help those very communities that they were, touting helping. And so ensuring that we have that transparency bill, ensuring that we have a legislature that understands that we will not bend over backwards to cater to these corporations is going to be the biggest thing that I think we've not only faced as a country, but here in Florida, we've allowed it to occur for so long with Republican control that it's just become a thing of the norm. And so even though our constituents, Floridians, are supposed to run Florida and we vote based on what we want to see, at the end of the day, we're not getting that say because it's these corporations that are funneling the money and dictating what actually happens in Florida. And so that's kind of where my focus would be, is making sure that we have clear transparency and making sure that we have politicians and candidates in office that are not going to accept that dark money and do what's in the best interest of our constituents and holding them accountable for it.
Yeah.
My big thing lately is, as I grow more in political understanding, is that I feel like the left is generally lost in this country and, almost non-existent, and especially in this state, even though we might nominally have like a 40%, 35-40%, it just doesn't translate into real political power. And we need to take some lessons from the right in how they took years to build their movement and really start focusing on brass tacks. So my thing is community building. And I heard you talking earlier, about the things that you were doing in your community. And I was wondering, understanding that being in the legislature is largely a lost cause as a Democrat and not having a whole lot of power. How would you be inclined to maybe work outside of the legislature to build community, like mutual aid and, getting people together, to take care of themselves, so that, when I hear about like the PreK, expanding PreK to a full day program, that's amazing, and then it's something that we need. But there's also so many other supports that are needed, like school lunches, breakfast, maybe, I don't know, just things that would help people if they just work together to provide those supports, because the state isn't going to provide them. And I don't know, I'm just kind of thinking out loud, so you must please forgive me if it's kind of a semi-formed thought that I'm just working through these things as I listen and learn. But those kinds of issues, like kind of like what these poor African socialists got arrested for and raided for, building community by bringing programs with people and getting people coming together to create pool resources for their own community outside of whatever the legislature is going to do. I mean, I don't know how do you feel about maybe working to organize or help, put people together to do stuff like that, to build community, to build power in a way that is independent of the government, because we're not going to get anything out of this legislature for decades.
Yeah, and I think you make a very valid point. We've said year after year as Democrats, and I say that lightly because I ended up, those who don't know, I ended up resigning as vice chair of the Democratic Party because I don't always like how the party moves. I'm not automatically going to sign for what the party says. I don't agree with how, we support establishment politicians, even though we say we shouldn't. There's a lot of things that the party itself doesn't do, but I also had to remind myself where my values and my beliefs align better, and that's why I'm a Democrat. But to your point, we have to come to a realization that year after year we've said, if we don't turn things around this election season, things are going to get worse. Well, that's exactly what has happened. They've gotten worse and worse and worse, and we've not made that progress. We've not done what the other side has done, which they have worked together to create one message. It may be a chaotic message. It may be a far end, I don't know how they get so many people to join their cult type of message, but it's a message that these people believe in. And that's where I feel that we are not on the same page, where we're sending multiple messages and we're not on the same page of unity. And to your point, if we can gather our resources from nonprofits to for-profits to corporations and holding people accountable from all levels, including our local government, to say, hey, let's work together to create the resources that people actually need, that people that are affecting everyday people. We could have far more success in our local communities by doing so than by waiting for a state legislature. And by all means, I get how that sounds, being that I'm running for state, state representative. But in reality, we go to Tallahassee and we vote on bills that are proposed without knowing sometimes whether this is impacting our very district and how much it is in fact impacting our very district. And people say, well, when you speak, make sure you speak to what Floridians need. But why am I speaking to what Floridians need if I'm designated to represent one district in Florida? What if the needs of District 70 aren't the same needs of District 62 or District 100 or District 69? What if those needs are different? Then how do we come together? And that's, to your point, where it's important that we get off this tangent of, hey, we're going to wait on state legislature because I hope we've turned things around. I'm praying to God we turn things around. But I'm also being a realist. And if we don't turn things around, we must do something like you just stated, or else we will have more people in the streets. We will have more people who are homeless. We will have more people who are entering a mental health crisis. We will have more people who don't have access to health care. We will have more people who are not entering our education system and instead are ending up in our jail systems. We will have tons more of that if we do not begin to work together. So I am on board with us working together as a community above all else to ensure that we meet the needs of our local constituents and our local residents, because that's what's most important. That's what a state representative is supposed to do. And I think that we've gotten away from that for quite some time, and it's been unfortunate. And that's main part has been to do with the fact that it's not been evenly balanced, and therefore it's been swayed to one way, and it's been to benefit one side over the other.
Yeah. So I think that's probably a great place to leave off with our conversation tonight. Junior, you've given us a good amount of your time, and it's been so nice hearing your really thoughtful responses on this stuff. We're going to share the recording with the other members of the group, and we'll be talking about an endorsement decision. You're looking pretty strong here, I would say. So just want to thank you so much for joining us, and let's be in touch about volunteering opportunities that you might have and events that you might have coming up. Really appreciate you joining us tonight and spending the time.
No, you're very welcome. I appreciate all of you that were able to join, and those of you who watch. If you have any questions, Josh, you have my number. I only have one number. You guys, anyone's able to text. Text is usually faster, especially right now. I'm trying to limit my mouth usage. I know that was not done as effectively tonight, but I wanted to limit it, until I have this procedure that I need to get done. But you can text anytime. I will reply. We'll set up some time if you want to grab coffee or whatever the case may be. I'm more than happy to reach out, and we can go from there.